They say the first year of marriage is the hardest. They're wrong. The first year is a blur of excitement and discovery. You're still learning the little things, the way she hums when she's cooking, the specific pitch of her laugh, when she's genuinely amused versus just being polite. For me and my wife Elena, the first year was easy. The second was a breeze. It was the fifth year. That's when the silence started to get heavy. That's when you realize you're no longer building something new. You're maintaining something old, and you start to notice the cracks. My name is Austin Sanchez. I'm 36 years old. 5 years ago, I married Elena. I was 31. She was 28. We had one of those weddings that people talk about for a while, not because it was extravagant, but because it just felt right. We seemed like the perfect couple, the ones who had it all figured out. We had a nice house in a quiet suburb, 2 cars in the garage, and a future that looked as neat and tidy as our freshly mowed lawn. From the outside, we were the American dream. But dreams can be deceiving. The truth is, a house is just a collection of rooms, and if you're not careful, you can end up living in separate ones under the same roof. The dynamic of our marriage was established early on, almost without discussion. I was the earner. I have a good job in finance, one of those high-stress, high-reward positions that demands long hours, but pays the bills, and then some. I didn't mind the work. I was good at it, and I took a quiet pride in being able to provide. I saw it as my role, my contribution to the life we were building together. Elena's contribution was different. She managed the house, she curated our social life, and she spent the money I earned. And for a long time, that arrangement worked, or at least I told myself it did. It started subtly. A casual comment about how her friends were all taking trips to Europe. A sigh when a commercial for a luxury car came on. The unspoken pressure to keep up, to not just live comfortably, but to live visibly well. I understood it to a degree. We were in our early 30s, an age where people start measuring their success against their peers. So I worked harder. I took on more projects, stayed later at the office. I wanted to give her the life she hinted at because making her happy I thought was the same as making us happy. About 3 years ago, 2 years into our marriage, the topic of finances came up in a more direct way. Elena was feeling constrained by having to ask me for money or use a debit card tied directly to our main checking account. She said it felt like she was a kid getting an allowance. She wanted more freedom, more autonomy. Her friend Zoe Hughes had a credit card from her husband with a high limit, and she could just buy what she wanted when she wanted. The comparison was clear. I wanted to be the cool, trusting husband. So I did my research. I have an excellent credit score, a result of years of careful financial management. I applied for a new card, a premium one, with great travel rewards and perks. The Capital One Venture X. It felt like a perfect fit for the lifestyle she wanted. When the card was approved based solely on my income and my credit history, I added Elena as an authorized user. They sent a second card to our house with her name embossed in silver on the front. She was ecstatic. She held it up to the light, admiring it. "See?" she said, smiling that smile that first made me fall for her. "This is better. This feels like we're a team." But it wasn't a team account. And that's a crucial detail. It wasn't a joint account where we were both legally responsible. It was my account. My name was on the primary line. My social security number was tied to the debt. I was the one who got the emails, the one who logged into the portal to pay the bill every single month. The bill that came to my inbox, not hers. She was in the cold, hard language of the financial world, simply an authorized user. She had all the spending power, and I had all the liability. At the time, I thought it was a gesture of ultimate trust. Looking back, I see it was the beginning of the end. It was the tool that would slowly, transaction by transaction, dismantle our marriage. The first few months were fine. Normal expenses. Groceries, gas, a new pair of shoes here and there. But then the numbers started to creep up. The monthly statements grew longer. There were lunches with her friends at expensive downtown restaurants, places I'd only go for a client meeting. There were spa days, so many spa days. There were boutiques I'd never heard of with charges that made my eyes water. $400, $700, $1,000. I never said anything. What could I say I had agreed to this? I had given her the card. Complaining about the spending would make me the bad guy, the controlling husband she'd worried I'd become. So I just paid the bill. Every month on the 15th, I'd log in, see the staggering total, take a deep breath, and transfer the money from my paycheck. And a quiet resentment began to take root in my heart. It was a cold, heavy thing that sat in my chest when I'd come home from a 12-hour day exhausted to find a row of new shopping bags from high-end stores lined up in the hallway. She'd be out with friends, and the bags would be the only things there to greet me. I'd walk past them, the crisp paper crinkling with the promise of things I'd never see her wear, and I'd feel empty. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the disconnect. I was spending my life, my energy, my time fueling a lifestyle that I wasn't even a part of. I was the engine hidden away in the dark, while she was the polished exterior, shining for everyone else to see. The appreciation I craved wasn't there. There was no thank you for working so hard so I could have this. There was just the expectation that the engine would keep running, that the account would always be paid, that the next purchase would be approved without a hitch. Elena, I think, was caught in her own trap. At 33, she was surrounded by friends who seemed to have it all, and her closest friend, Zoe Hughes, was the queen bee of their little circle. Zoe was 34, married to a surgeon, and lived her life as if it were a reality TV show. Every day was an event. Every lunch was an opportunity for drama. Every conversation was a performance. Zoe had a way of speaking in subtle digs and backhanded compliments. She projected an image of a thrilling, passionate, dramatic life, and the other women in their group, including Elena, scrambled to keep up. I saw it whenever I was around them. Elena's personality would shift. The quiet, thoughtful woman I married would recede, replaced by someone louder, more assertive, someone who told exaggerated stories and laughed a little too hard. She was performing the role of the exciting, sophisticated woman who wasn't just a boring, suburban wife. She was trying to convince them, and maybe herself, that her life was just as glamorous as theirs, and I was the anchor holding her back. My steady, predictable life, my quiet nights at home, my preference for a good book over a loud club. In her world, my stability wasn't a strength, it was a weakness. It was boring. I became a character in the story she told her friends, the reliable but dull husband, the provider, the guy who paid the bills but didn't offer any of the drama or intrigue that made for a good story over a $200 lunch. The resentment inside me grew with every monthly statement. I'd see a charge for a $500 dinner for 4 people and realize I wasn't one of them. I'd see a weekend hotel charge in the city and know she'd gone for a girls' weekend that I funded but wasn't invited to. Each transaction felt like a small paper cut, insignificant on its own, but after hundreds of them, I was bleeding out. The partnership felt gone. I wasn't a husband anymore. I was a bank, and I was beginning to feel overdrawn. Our conversations became purely logistical. Did you pick up the dry cleaning? The lawn guy is coming on Thursday. Don't forget we have your parents' anniversary dinner on Saturday. The intimacy, the connection, the simple joy of just being together had evaporated, replaced by the mundane hum of cohabitation. We were roommates sharing a bed, and one of us was paying all the rent. This was our life 5 years in. A beautiful house filled with expensive things that felt like a museum of a life I wasn't living. A wife who seemed more invested in the opinions of her friends than in the state of our marriage. And me, a 36-year-old man sitting alone in his expensive, quiet house, looking at a credit card statement on his laptop screen, wondering how the woman he loved had become a stranger whose life he was subsidizing. The cracks in our foundation were turning into canyons, and I just knew that it was only a matter of time before the whole thing came crashing down. All it would take was one final push, and that push was coming sooner than I ever could have imagined. The final push came on a Tuesday. It started like any other Tuesday. I worked from my home office, and Elena was getting ready for what she called a girls' night out. It was always a production. An hour and a half in the bathroom, emerging in a cloud of expensive perfume that cost more per ounce than some fine wines. She'd put on a dress I'd only ever seen in a picture, on the credit card statement a sleek black number that probably cost a week of my take-home pay. She'd stand in front of the full-length mirror, turning this way and that, not looking for my approval, but for the approval of a phantom audience, a jury of her peers. I remember watching her from the doorway of our bedroom. She was so focused, so energized. There was a spark in her eyes, a genuine excitement that I hadn't seen directed at me in years. The last time she'd looked that happy to see me was probably on our wedding day 5 years ago. Now that vibrant energy was reserved for her friends for nights out that I funded but was never a part of. "Have fun," I said, my voice flat. She glanced at me through the mirror, a quick dismissive flicker of her eyes. "I will. Don't wait up." And then she was gone, the click of her heels on the hardwood floor fading as she left the scent of her perfume, lingering in the air like a ghost. I spent that evening alone as usual. I made myself dinner, watched a game on TV, and answered a few late-work emails. The house was cavernous and silent. Every tick of the clock seemed to mock me, counting the seconds of a life I was paying for but not truly living. This was my contribution, the silent, steady engine, humming in the background, providing the power for her to go out and shine. I went to bed long before she came home, the other side of our king-sized bed, cold and empty. That was 72 hours before our life imploded. The next 2 days were strange. There was a new kind of distance between us. It wasn't the usual quiet indifference. It was something heavier, almost like pity. Elena would look at me with this odd expression, a little smirk playing on her lips, as if she were in on a joke that I wasn't. She'd be texting, constantly smiling at her phone, and if I asked who it was, she'd just wave a hand and say, "Oh, just Zoe, you know." I did know. I knew Zoe was the ringleader, the one Elena was so desperate to impress. The conversations felt stilted, forced. I tried to connect to ask about her night out, but all I got were vague, one-word answers. It was fun, the usual, nothing special. It felt like she was protecting a secret, and the more she hid it, the more the pit in my stomach grew. I felt like a stranger in my own home, an outsider, looking in at a life that was happening around me without me. The confirmation came on Thursday. I was in my office trying to finalize a report when my phone buzzed. It was a call from a number I recognized with a jolt of dread, Zoe Hughes. I never spoke to Zoe. In the 5 years Elena and I had been married, I could count on one hand the number of direct conversations we'd had. She was Elena's friend, not mine. My first instinct was to ignore it. A call from her could only mean trouble. I let it go to voicemail, but she immediately called back. My heart started pounding. This was intentional. This was an ambush. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello? Austin, hi, it's Zoe." Her voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with fake concern. It was the kind of voice someone uses right before they stick a knife in your back. "Sorry to bother you at work. I don't know if I should even be doing this, but I feel like you deserve to know." My blood ran cold. "Know what, Zoe?" There was a dramatic pause on the other end of the line. She was savoring this. "Well, we were all out on Tuesday, just us girls having some wine and talking, and your name came up." I stayed silent. I could feel the trap closing around me. Elena she was talking about you guys, about your life together. Another pause. She was drawing it out, making sure every word landed with maximum impact. She was telling everyone how predictable you are, how you're a great provider and you give her everything she wants, but that she said you're boring. Specifically, she told all of us that you're boring in bed. The world stopped. The words hung in the air, echoing in the sudden, deafening silence of my office. Boring. In. Bed. It wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict. A public declaration of my failure as a husband, as a man, delivered by my wife to a giggling audience of her friends, and now reported back to me by the gleeful messenger, Zoe. I don't remember what I said. I think I just mumbled, "Okay," and hung up the phone. I sat there staring at the wall, the phone still clutched in my hand. The report on my screen blurred. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It wasn't just the words, it was the crushing, humiliating realization of what had actually happened. My wife, Elena, had used the money I earned from my boring life to buy a $200 dinner and expensive cocktails so she could sit around with her friends and mock the very man who made it all possible. Every single transaction on that Capital One Venture X card flashed through my mind. The $500 spa day last month. That was her relaxing before telling her friends I was a dud. The $1,000 weekend trip to the city. That was the getaway where she probably refined the joke. The endless charges from boutique clothing stores. That was her buying the costume for her performance. The performance where I was the punchline. The disrespect was staggering. It was a betrayal so profound it almost didn't feel real. She wasn't just complaining about our private life. She was taking the fruits of my labor, the result of my 16-hour workdays, my stress, my sacrifice, and converting it into social currency. And the way she spent that currency was by devaluing me. She was projecting an image of a woman trapped in a dull marriage, a passionate soul shackled to a boring provider. It was a convenient, self-serving lie that made her seem more interesting to her friends. And I was the fool paying for the stage, the props, and the tickets. The initial shock, that cold, numb feeling, slowly began to recede, and underneath it, something else began to burn. It started as a low ember in the pit of my stomach and quickly grew into a raging fire. It was pure, undiluted rage, a rage so clean and so focused it felt like clarity. I thought about Zoe. Why would she tell me it wasn't out of loyalty to me? She was pouring gasoline on a fire. She wanted the drama. She wanted to see what would happen when the boring, predictable husband found out he was a laughingstock. She was an arsonist disguised as a firefighter. And then I thought about Elena. I pictured her at that table, wine glass in hand, leaning in to deliver the punchline to her friends, getting the laugh, the sympathy, the attention she craved. She had made a choice. She had chosen to humiliate me for sport. She had taken the most intimate part of our marriage and turned it into a public joke. A verbal confrontation was pointless. What would I say? Zoe told me what you said. She would deny it. She would call Zoe a liar. She would twist it around, accuse me of being insecure of listening to gossip. She would gaslight me until I apologized for being upset. I had seen her do it before. She was a master at it. No words were her weapon, her arena. I couldn't beat her there. I needed a different language, a language she would understand, a language of cause and effect, a language of receipts. She had attacked my character in a public forum, so I would respond in a public forum. She had presented a narrative to her friends about her sad, boring life with her boring provider husband. Fine. I would provide the evidence to the contrary. I would show them all in black and white the true cost of her boredom. My gaze drifted across my desk and landed on my wallet. Tucked inside was my own Capital One Venture X card, the primary card, the one that ruled the account, the one that gave me total access, total control, the key to the kingdom she had taken for granted. A cold, grim certainty settled over me. The rage didn't disappear, but it changed. It became focused. It became a plan. The emotional storm had passed, and in its wake was a dead, calm sea. I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to publish the truth. I swiveled my chair back to my computer, the half-finished report forgotten. I closed the document and opened a new browser tab. I typed in the bank's web address, my fingers moving with a steady, deliberate purpose. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound in my chest. But now it had a purpose. It was fuel. I was no longer the victim of her story. I was about to become the author of a new one, an author with all the receipts. The login screen loaded its familiar blue and white logo, a stark contrast to the red-hot anger pulsing behind my eyes. I typed in my username and password from muscle memory. For 3 years, I had logged into this portal every month to do one thing: pay the bill. I'd look at the total, wince a little, and then transfer the money, telling myself it was the cost of making my wife happy. Tonight I was logging in to do something very different. I navigated to the Statements tab. The click of the mouse was the only sound in the room, each one feeling as heavy and final as a judge's gavel. I selected the most recent billing cycle, and a PDF icon appeared. Download. The file saved to my desktop in less than a second. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the cold, methodical rhythm of my actions. I opened the document, and there it was, a 5-page testament to my wife's boredom. Page 1. A $300 brunch with her friends at that trendy downtown spot. I remembered her mentioning it. She'd said it was just a little get-together. Page 2. $700 at a high-end spa for a revitalization package. The charge was from 72 hours ago, the same day as the girls' night out. She had spent the afternoon being pampered and polished on my dime just hours before she sat down to assassinate my character. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Page 345. It was a relentless parade of boutiques, online shopping sprees, expensive dinners and ride-sharing services, to and from places I was never invited to. Each line item was a small, sharp betrayal. Each charge was another brick in the wall she had built between us, a wall I was unknowingly financing. This wasn't the spending of a woman in a partnership. This was the spending of a kept woman who held her keeper in contempt. I took a screenshot of each page, saving them as image files. Then I opened a simple editing program. I drew a neat black box over the full account number, leaving only the last 4 digits visible for identification. It was important to me that this wasn't a reckless act of financial warfare. I wasn't trying to get her card stolen. I was redacting a document for public evidence. I wasn't doxing her. I was fact-checking her in the most brutal way imaginable. With the 4 images ready, I opened my social media page. My profile was private, but we had over 300 mutual friends. Her entire social circle, including Zoe Hughes, would see it instantly. I created a new post, uploaded the 4 images, and paused my finger hovering over the keyboard. What was the caption? What was the perfect combination of words to detonate this bomb? I typed, "Just reviewing the monthly statement for my wife's Capital One Venture X card. It's a relief to see that her life is as boring as she says it is. Glad I can provide her with so little excitement." It was passive-aggressive. It was cutting. It was perfect. I stared at the post for a long, silent moment. This was it, the point of no return. The trust in our 5-year marriage was a flimsy rope bridge, and I was holding a lit match. I clicked post, and the bridge burned. For the first 2 minutes, nothing happened. It was just out there floating in the digital ether. And then the first notification appeared. A like from a mutual friend, then another, then a shocked emoji reaction. Then my phone, sitting on the desk beside me, started to vibrate. A text message, then another. It began to buzz and chime with a relentless escalating rhythm like a Geiger counter nearing a radioactive core. I didn't look at the messages. I didn't need to. I just watched the post. The comments started to roll in. "OMG," wrote one of Elena's friends. "Is this for real?" another asked. Zoe Hughes herself simply posted a wide-eyed emoji, the digital equivalent of a spectator munching on popcorn at a gladiatorial match. She had gotten the drama she wanted. The beauty of my revenge was its simplicity. I didn't have to call anyone a liar. I didn't have to argue or explain. The evidence spoke for itself. All of Elena's friends who had just heard her tale of woe about being trapped with a boring man were now scrolling through a 4-figure bill that detailed a life of leisure and luxury. They were seeing the spa days she took while I was working. They were seeing the $100 lunches. They were seeing the stark, undeniable proof that the story she told them was a complete fabrication, designed to make her look tragic and interesting. And more than that, they were seeing my name implicitly all over it. They knew I was the primary earner. They were smart enough to connect the dots. This wasn't her card, it was my card. Her story wasn't just a lie, it was an ungrateful one. The narrative had been flipped. She was no longer the sympathetic, long-suffering wife. She was the spoiled, deceitful one, and I was the provider she had publicly slandered. An hour later, I heard her car pull into the driveway. The front door opened and slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. I heard her footsteps fast and heavy coming toward my office. I swiveled my chair to face the door, my heart, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. She burst in her face a mask of pure fury. Her phone was clutched in her hand like a weapon. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice trembling with rage. "What is wrong with you? My phone is blowing up. Everyone is sending me screenshots. How could you do this to me?" Notice what she didn't say. She didn't say, "That's not true." She didn't say, "Why would you believe?" That she wasn't angry that she had lied. She was furious that she had been caught. I looked at her, my expression completely neutral. "Do what to you, Elena?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I just posted a credit card statement, a statement for an account that I own, a bill that I pay. Is there something on there that isn't true?" "You humiliated me," she screamed. "You aired our private finances to the entire world. For what? Because you're cheap, because you're angry. I bought a new dress." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, the false accusations echoing in the silence. Then I delivered the final fatal blow. "No," I said softly. "Not because of the dress. Because you sat at a table with your friends and told them I was boring in bed." The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like I had physically struck her. The self-righteous fury evaporated, replaced by the panicked, cornered look of a liar who had just run out of road. "Who?" she stammered. "Who told you that?" "Zoe did," I said, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "She told me everything." That was it. The second hit. In that moment, she didn't just realize that I knew her secret. She realized she had been betrayed by her own inner circle. Her carefully constructed social world had just collapsed in on itself. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and hatred. The trust between us wasn't just broken. It had been atomized. There was nothing left to salvage. We both knew it. She didn't say another word. She just turned and walked out of the room. A few minutes later, I heard the front door open and close, much more quietly this time, and then silence. I sat there in my office for a long time, the screen of my computer casting a pale glow on my face. My phone had finally stopped buzzing. The battle was over. I had won. I had defended my honor. I had taken control of the narrative and exposed her lies with undeniable proof. But the victory tasted like ash. My home was silent and empty. My marriage of 5 years was over. I had won the argument, but in doing so, I had lost the most significant relationship of my adult life. Was it worth it? In that moment of raw, wounded pride, the answer was yes. There was one last thing to do. I turned back to my computer and logged into the credit card portal one more time. I navigated to the account settings to the section marked Authorized Users. I saw her name, Elena Sanchez, listed right below mine. With a steady hand, I clicked the small button next to her name that said, Remove User. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to permanently remove this user from your account? They will no longer be able to make purchases. I clicked Confirm. It was the quietest, most violent thing I had ever done. It was the final keystroke in the story of us. The financial tie was severed. The curtain had fallen. I was left alone in the quiet house, the sole victor in a war that had left no survivors.